A sea of endless green, a maze of foliage with half-hidden cities growing like blooms from a flower. The home of the Bosmer is Tamriel's garden. When I think of a garden, I think of a respite from the politics of the household. While the other races of Tamriel vie for control of the seat at the head of the table, the Wood Elves are perfectly content to ramble amid the viridescent vegetation, taking in Ifra's natural wonders. The Choir of Birdsong, the susurration of wind through the leaves, the scent of wild berries ripening. A continent named Dawn's Beauty ought to have an equally beautiful garden, and the verdant expanses of Valenwood don't disappoint. Just as a garden is a patch of tranquility adjoining a home, Valenwood is a place of relative peace. The Wood Elves who call the province home are known for being the most pacifistic and peaceful of all of Tamriel's inhabitants. Some people, those who view aggression and domination as signs of superiority, use this description as a criticism. One archivist claims the Bosmer are quite willing to bend like saplings to the will of others. Another goes as far as to call them cowardly. But the reality is, despite their physiological similarities to the other elven races, the Bosmer are as alien to the Mer in their values and their culture as any beast folk. The Wood Elves, for the most part, don't care for intercontinental power struggles. They have the perfect homeland, one which they can navigate with ease, while travellers fumble with maps that fruitlessly attempt to bring order to Valenwood's untamed landscapes, and build roads in the vain hope of linking cities that move of their own volition. In reality, the Wood Elves aren't competing with their neighbours. Unless a threat to Valenwood presents itself, the Bosmer consider the slaying of others to be simply unnecessary, and wagers are often made prior to raids, regarding the theft of prized possessions without a drop of blood spilled. This may seem weak to some, but those individuals have likely never fought against a Wood Elven archer. The Bosmer of Valenwood may not participate in most of Tamriel's major events, but that does not mean they have not yielded their share of greatness. Hey guys, it's Drew here and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. In the second installment of my Greatest Mortal series, we're going to determine who is the greatest Wood Elf to ever set foot on Tamriel. The Imperials are a tough act to follow, but there are still plenty of contenders hailing from Valenwood. As the intro suggests, the Bosmer have their quirks, and there will even be some controversy and conspiracy surrounding a couple of these great Wood Elves. But before we get to those, I think we should start with an individual who perfectly encapsulates the combat prowess of the Bosmer. We don't have an awful lot of information about individual Wood Elves, as I'm sure many of their greatest characters never made it into the archives of the Imperials or the High Elves. But this individual has been documented, and her achievements show just how skilled Wood Elves can be on the battlefield. Her name is Lady Elena Bennock. Lady Bennock, like her ancestors, took to the bow in her early years. Marksmanship is a fundamental skill in a society where you must hunt for your meals. The Green Pact dictates that no Bosmer may harm the flora, so Wood Elves are entirely carnivorous. Elena excelled with the bow, and by age 14, she became a Jack Spur in her tribe. This title was coveted among the Wood Elves. Jack Spurs are highly skilled distance shooters, and the Sylvanar chooses from Valenwood's best Jack Spurs in assembling his elite personal guard. Her skill was first truly put to the test in the year 396 of the Third Era, when the Paric tribe, with the backing of the Aldmer of Somerset, went on a rampage across southern Valenwood. It was here she learned the brutality of war. She had killed 100 foes, but these kills were all at range, and it was a member of the Paric tribe she first killed in close combat. She had tried to loose an arrow into her enemy from half a yard away. This had obviously failed, and she was forced to wrestle her opponent and kill him with a dagger. This was when she realised she needed to learn swordsmanship. Teaching the sword was not common in Valenwood, but the events of the Black Year had seen Elena's tribe dispersed, and she was homeless. She made it to Hammerfell and learned from the Red Guards. She excelled in swordplay just as she had in archery, and soon ventured Tamriel, making money as a freelance mercenary. Later in life, she became the master of the Valenwood Fighters Guild, after beating the former master in single combat. This former master had been a minion of the traitorous Imperial battle mage Jaegers Scheme. The guild was dissolved 2 years later, so Elena soon found herself roving again. She drew the attention of the Empire after saving Queen Acherithy of Sentinel from a Breton assassin. After this, she was recruited as a member of the Imperial Guard, directly serving Emperor Uriel Septim VII. Though she never outwardly admitted it, it is believed that, on orders from the Emperor, Elaine carried out the assassination of Uriel's bastard son Calaxes, after Calaxes, the Archbishop of the Temple of the One, began advocating for a rebellion. He was adamant that the gods were displeased with how secular the Empire was becoming, and the only solution was to become a full-fledged theocracy. Lady Elena was an expert warrior, both at range and up close, and she became an important figure in Tamrielic politics, saving important figures from assassination while executing others. Hers will not be a name remembered eternally, and few will sing of her deeds, but Elena Benok was a powerful wood elf. I mentioned another name in Elena's story that rose to greatness in Tamriel and warrants a mention, though his great deeds were by no means good ones, and his story requires a disclaimer. There seems to be a trend with Tamriel's more menacing Myr. When a figure wishes to remain mysterious and misunderstood, they tend to mislead others about their heritage. The next great Bosmer, as well as the following one, have both been accused of this, and it's easy to see why a mortal who wishes to remain enigmatic would claim Bosmeri parentage. The Wood Elves generally avoid conflict with other races, so you can't really attribute a motive to individuals born in Valenwood. And it's also easier to pull off, as the province is still so strange to non-natives. And as the book titled Valenwood A Study aptly states, the Bosmer welcome those who come to Valenwood seeking refuge from other lands. The first of these two figures, and the one who was mentioned briefly in Elena's story, is Jaeger Farn. In the words of Abner Farn, we Farns have held positions of power throughout Cyrodiil since the days of the Potentate. We are prized for our loyalty to the Empire, our deft political machinations, and our ruthless subjugation or elimination of dissenters within Imperial territories. What we do is grim work, but it is necessary if the Empire is to endure, and while this description certainly applies to the peculiar Jaeger Farn, he is very much a black sheep in the family. The Farn family is famous across Cyrodiil, and its members have predominantly been Imperial humans, but Jaeger Farn is described as a mongrel elf by Symmachus of Mournhold, part Dark Elf and part High Elf. Symmachus says, no one knows much about him, claims he was born in southern Valenwood, of a wood elven mother, seems to have been everywhere since. Jaeger Farn is the kind of character who likes to keep secrets. He is a master of political machinations, of deception, and of realizing his ambitions. How can your rivals discover your weaknesses and your dispositions when they can't even be sure what race you are? That was the kind of man or Myr Jaeger Farn was. He was an Imperial battle mage with a desire to sit on the Ruby Throne. He was a dangerous and cunning individual. His plan took months to prepare. First, he disguised himself as a bard in order to steal the Staff of Chaos from the city of Mournhold. Alternative sources claim it was actually the thief Draven Indoril who posed as the bard, but whatever the case, it was Jaeger's scheme, and it was successful. Uriel Septim VII was concerned about the theft. He was rightly worried that the culprit may use the staff against him, so he put his battle mage, the trustworthy Jaeger Farn, on the case. Septim's early successes in expanding and strengthening the Empire were largely thanks to the counsel he received from Jaeger, who was remarkably wise and possessed an array of arcane powers. As the years passed, and Uriel VII saw his empire flourish, he unsurprisingly put an enormous amount of trust in his battle mage and closest advisor. But when Jaeger requested to meet the Emperor to discuss rumours of treachery, everything went awry. Jaeger harnessed the power of the Staff of Chaos to imprison the Emperor in a horrific realm of unrelenting nightmares. This plane of Oblivion was not subject to the laws of time that govern the mortal realm, and as a result, the Emperor would be forced to endure centuries of mental torment in this dark world. To prevent a swift rescue, Jaeger drained the power of the staff and disassembled it into 8 pieces. He imbued the energy of the deconstructed staff, as well as his own life essence, inside an artifact called the Jewel of Fire. With his plan executed, the simulacrum could commence. Jaeger dismissed all of the Emperor's loyal men and replaced them with his own minions, and those who did not leave were imprisoned. The Imperial Simulacrum was the name for the decade-long period in which Jaeger sat on the Ruby Throne. It's called the Simulacrum because Jaeger used illusion magic in order to masquerade as Uriel Septim. Jaeger Farn was always an enigma, and his motive remains a complete mystery. We know he was a wise counselor, yet the Empire suffered severely during his unlawful reign. He neglected and mismanaged imperial affairs, and allowed the Empire's economic prosperity, which he was instrumental in growing to begin with, to decline significantly. It seems as though Jaeger wasn't so interested in power, but rather wished to sabotage the Empire. Someone who is power-hungry and willing to betray anyone for a throne does not hide behind illusion spells. Tyrants want to be seen and known and feared. Jaegers' scheme was extraordinary because so few people knew of the treachery. Jaeger even made a bargain with the Daedra Lord Mehrunes Dagon, a deal which allowed the Prince of Destruction to invade the Imperial Battle Spire. Jaeger was ultimately foiled 10 years after he took the Empire in 3rd Era 399, when the Eternal Champion gathered the pieces of the Staff of Chaos, released the energy from the Jewel of Fire, and killed the Imperial Battle Mage. Jaeger, as well as our next great individual, may have been able to challenge for a place higher on the list, but both have unclear origins, and it doesn't seem fair to class Jaeger Tharn as a true Bosmer when we're relying purely on his word. We know he is deceitful and fond of disguises, but that brings us to the third greatest wood elf, if he truly is a wood elf, and his name is Mankar Camoran. Mankar is an interesting character, not just because of his actions, but because of the inconsistencies when it comes to his lineage. Jaeger Tharn appeared in the Elder Scrolls arena, and unlike in Oblivion or Skyrim, you can't identify the race of a character beyond their appearance and the lore surrounding them. But with Mankar, he is specifically designed as a high elf. While in the Legends card game, Mankar's card is categorized as both a high elf creature and a wood elf creature. There is lore pertaining to Mankar's heritage, so why would there be any confusion when developing the character in game? The book titled The Refugees tells the story of a pregnant Bosmer, the mistress of the infamous Cameron usurper. She had given birth and told a healer her baby's name, Mankar. If Mankar truly is the illegitimate son of the Cameron usurper, then we'd have no doubts about his wood elven origins. But in a dedicated video to the character, I offered a different theory. If you'd like to hear about it in detail, I'll leave a link to the video in the description. And here's a meme I posted on Twitter that summarizes the theory. Remember I said that claiming Bosmeri heritage is the perfect way to disguise your true origins? Well, I think Mankar Camoran did exactly that, to cover his Aelid origins. But that's a rabbit hole that leads all the way to Oblivion. We're here to talk about the greatest Bosmer, and considering the lore we have available, Mankar belongs on this list. Mankar Camoran was the leader of the Mythic Dawn cult. Mankar's search for wisdom took him away from the typical gods of mortals, and he describes this process in the beginning of his commentaries. Mankar Camoran was once like you, asleep, unwise, protonymic. We mortals leave the dreaming sleeve of birth the same, unmantled save for the symbiosis with our mothers, thus to practice and thus to reproachment, until finally we might, through new eyes, leave our halves without need or fear that she remains behind. In this moment, we destroy her forever and enter the domain of Lord Dagon. Mankar Camoran was given the Daedric artifact known as the Mysterium Xarxes, from the Prince of Destruction himself. Dagon had written the tome in the Desert of Rust and Wounds, which is a reference to his realm, the Deadlands. Mankar wished to unravel the mysteries of the Xarxes, and his account of the process was cryptic. He claimed to have lost his voice, and when it returned, it spoke with another tongue. He wrote that after 3 nights he could speak fire. This claim implies that Mankar Camoran had developed the abilities of a dragonborn, which is supported by the fact that he was able to don the Amulet of Kings. But once again, the truth is not clear, as all matters regarding this figure are opaque. What we do know is that Mankar Camoran was able to use his understanding of the Mysterium to cut out his own piece of Oblivion. It was a small pocket realm named Gaia Alata, or Paradise as he called it. Mankar was convinced that Lorkhan, the trickster god, who was the catalyst for the creation of the mortal realm, was a Daedric prince, and his realm of Oblivion was Tamriel. He writes, "I give my soul to the Magnigi, saith the joyous in paradise, for they created Mehrunes the Razor in secret, in the very bowels of Lig, the domain of the upstart who vanishes." Reading one sentence from the commentaries is enough to drive a mortal to madness, but Mankar was saying that the Magnigi, who are Magnus the god of magic and his followers, created Mehrunes Dagon in the depths of the ancient land called Lig. It's the second part that's important. He calls Lig the domain of the upstart who vanishes. He says Lig is Lorkhan's realm, and it is theorized that Lig is the name for Tamriel before the Dawn Era, before it transitioned from one Kalpa to the next. It's all very confusing, but if you're unsure of what a Kalpa is, imagine Satakal, the serpent god of the Yakudans. The snake eats itself from the tail, and when he does, the world ends. But then the cycle begins anew. It's the circle of life and the resetting of time. Mehrunes Dagon is the Lord of Revolution, and Mankar Camoran intends to aid the prince in his scheme to ravage Tamriel and free it from the tyranny of the Nine Divines. Mankar's zealous plan was almost a resounding success. His minions assassinated the Emperor and all of his heirs. They extinguished the dragon fires. Mankar even got his hands on the Amulet of Kings, but he was thwarted by a hidden Septim heir. Together, Martin Septim and the Champion of Cyrodiil put an end to Mankar Camoran and his life's work. And now we come to the top two greatest Wood Elves of all time. These two individuals are Bosmer, there's no ambiguity, and they both had a significant impact, not only on Valenwood, but on the whole of Tamriel. The first is the supposed father of Mankar Camoran. He's not the greatest of the Camoran dynasty, but he's by far the most barbarous. His name is Haemon Camoran, better known as the Camoran Usurper. The Camoran dynasty ruled Valenwood for thousands of years, but in the year 429 of the Third Era, there was a dispute of succession. One of the claimants was named Camoran Kaltos, and he managed the impressive feat of conquering the entire province of Valenwood in the span of 2 years. This was possible thanks to Kaltos' sorcerer and chief advisor, Haemon Camoran. Haemon employed mercenaries, as well as legions of undead and Daedra to bolster his ranks. These warriors were fearless and brazen, and proved too much for the purely Bosmeri opposition. But Haemon Heartking soon proved himself a liability to Kaltos. Like a violent hound tugging against his leash, Haemon's conquest would not stop at the borders of the Bosmeri province. Without consulting Kaltos, Haemon pushed his armies north into Calovia. Kaltos was ambitious, but also prudent, and saw the dangers of overreaching, but Haemon would not heed Kaltos' warnings, nor his pleas to desist. Haemon betrayed Kaltos and claimed the Camoran throne for himself, thus earning himself the title Camoran Usurper. The first victim of Haemon's rampage across Tamriel was the Calovian city of Kvatch. His army sacked the city, and news of Haemon Heartking's brutality spread. Not even civilians were spared from the violence. Within 13 years, the Camoran Usurper had conquered most of Hammerfell, the land of Tamriel's fiercest warriors. With much of Calovia and Hammerfell under his control, Haemon turned his attention to High Rock. I say under control, but annexing land does not mean it automatically became a cohesive part of the Camoran kingdom. It seems unlikely that in his haste, Haemon actually bothered to settle the lands or appoint governors to these new holdings. He razed Western Tamriel, he didn't conquer it. Nevertheless, no one could dispute his military prowess. No wood elf that we know of has ever won so many battles and defeated so many foes. Haemon Camoran likely saw High Rock as an easier campaign than Hammerfell, as the Breton kingdoms were constantly feuding, and the opposition would be less skilled in the arts of war. But High Rock was a long way from home. Committing to this invasion would mean longer supply lines, and more territory to defend if Haemon hoped to keep the land he'd attained. He risked encirclement and certain death, yet commit he did. At first it was easy. The Bretons were not fond of the Cyrodiilic Empire, and Haemon Camoran was seen as something of a liberator. Up until now, the Empire had been caught up in its own succession war. They had dispatched a small band of mercenaries to check the threat in Hammerfell, but it had been dealt with effortlessly. So for a short while, many of the Breton petty kingdoms welcomed Haemon. However, his brutality would rouse the Bretons, and they would make the same realization Kaltos had. Haemon Camoran could not be restrained. 4 fiefdoms of High Rock banded together against the Bosmeri invader. These lands were Acarlon, Phrygius, Cambria, and Dwinnen, led by Baron Offrock of Dwinnen. This alliance combined forces with Kaltos Camoran of Valenwood and confronted the Camoran Usurper on the northern shores of the Iliac Bay in Dwinnen. Haemon Camoran's army was defeated, and the Usurper was killed on the battlefield. Haemon Heartking was not a good king. He was not benevolent or merciful, but despite his savagery, the Cameron usurper's campaign was impressive. He bit off more than he could chew when he cut his way to High Rock, but his role in unifying Valenwood at a time of serious civil unrest proved his capabilities. He was a severely flawed king, and he was not the greatest of his dynasty. No, the greatest member of the Cameron dynasty was the one who founded it. His name was Eplir. King Eplir's story is short and sweet, as the histories were not quite so detailed in his time, but his achievements are unrivaled in Valenwood, and his impact on Tamriel is still felt with every passing day and every new year. That's because King Eplir is the individual responsible for the beginning of the first year of the First Era. That goes to show how momentous his deeds were. Valenwood, Tamriel's garden, is a wild place to this day. Thousands of years ago, the notion that one wood elf could tame these forests and bring them under the rule of a single monarch was preposterous. But that's exactly what Eplir did. He united the wild Bosmer and gave the province a political identity. According to the Pocket Guide to the Empire 3rd edition, Eplir's success in uniting the inherently wild Bosmer must be counted among the greatest military feats in Tamriel's history. This unification of Valenwood led to the creation of the Cameron dynasty. Eplir was the first king of this era-spanning lineage, and the day he achieved this became the Tamriel-wide first day of the first year of the First Era. So Eplir achieved one of the greatest military feats in history, and the monarchy he introduced would endure for thousands of years. But what about Eplir himself? What was he like off the battlefield? Well, it seems that he was a magnanimous and kind king. One thing we know is that he opened his borders to former slaves, fleeing Aelid oppression early in the First Era, and then he did the same for the Aelids fleeing from the Elysian Rebellion. It's uncertain when Eplir died, and he may have died prior to the Elysian Rebellion in First Era 242, but it would be fair to assert that, given the relatively short reign of the Cameron dynasty at this point, that any decision made by the Cameron king was heavily influenced by the values of Eplir. King Eplir, the founder of the enduring Cameron dynasty, was the greatest wood elf of all time, and his achievements are deeply rooted in the history of Valenwood. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've been Drew, this has been FudgeMuppet, and I'll see you in the next one.